Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our latest edition, ripped from the headlines, which we've entitled, Can Rabbis Ban Conversions? And we've addressed different issues of Jewish identity in the past and different areas relating to this conversion, different aspects of the conversion. But this one came from a headline a couple of weeks ago out of Argentina. It was in the JTA. It's in source number 1. Argentina's Sephardic chief rabbi reaffirmed a 100-year-old ruling that conversion may not be performed in Argentina is considered valid only if carried out in Israel. Representatives of non-Orthodox movements reacted angrily, asking why the ruling was issued now and saying it would essentially subject Argentinian converts to the tight hold that Israel's Orthodox rabbis have on conversion. The document issued on January 13th and signed by Chief Rabbi Yosef Shibar reaffirms a takana, or rabbinical ban, first established in Argentina in 1927. The authors of that ban, Rabbi Shaul Sityon Daba of the Syrian Aleppo tradition, and the Ashkenazi Rabbi Aaron Goldman, emerged in response to the proliferation of lax or irregular conversions, particularly in rural areas among Jewish immigrants. Statements signed by Shibar describes the ban as general and binding. It emphasized that the decree was enacted permanently with no temporal limitation or expiration whatsoever, and frames it as a safeguard for the purity of lineage and the sanctity of our families. In the years since the original ban, however, non-Orthodox rabbis say the conversion process has been standardized and that the level of preparation in Argentina is considered very high. The Masorti Seminary, which has conducted conversion since its founding in 1962, argues that the reasons for the restriction are no longer applicable. Rabbi Isaac Saka, the Sephardic chief rabbi of Buenos Aires, posted Shiabar's ruling on social media and defended it in an interview with JTA. The regulation represents a self-imposed limitation by Argentina's Orthodox rabbis on their own authority, undertaken in order to ensure the security and peace of mind that a practice as delicate and sacred as conversion is carried out with due seriousness, and that neither the convert nor families nor the community are misled. Within Orthodox circles in Argentina, preparatory stages of conversion may take place in the country, but the Beit Din that validates them operates in Israel. Shibar's recent statement specifies that the takana applies both to any person residing in Argentina as well as to anyone coming from another country with the intention of establishing residence in national territory, even in cases in which the conversion has already been carried out in their country of origin or another country outside of Eretz Yisrael. The ruling does not constitute rejection of the convert, nor does it devalue those who sincerely seek to join Judaism. On the contrary, it functions as a halachic safeguard designed to preserve a core commandment linked to Jewish identity in context marked by societal pressures and institutional weaknesses. It also seeks to prevent hasty decisions that could affect the spiritual and personal lives of those seeking conversion, as well as those of their descendants. So this is a 100-year-old story in Argentina that is now made the headlines again as they reinstituted it, and it brings to mind certain disagreements that exist with regards to conversion in general, and mentioning you have those who are having a more stringent path or a more narrow path towards conversion. You have those who feel they're doing a good job but are being rejected. You can read the entire article. There seems to be some politics, and it's not just the Masorti. The Masorti doesn't really, the conservative movement doesn't really care so much about the Orthodox movement, that some of these moves are related to different streams within the modern Orthodox community. The Orthodox community has more modern, more traditionalist, and the like. We know from a study of different other issues within conversion that there's often a different, a more restrictive, narrower path to conversion or a more open path to conversion. Interesting that the article mentions how this started off with Rabbi Shibar, Rabbi Sityon Daba, and Rabbi Aaron Goldman in 1927. So if you look into this issue a little bit, it actually, for the most part, the Sephardic rabbinical tradition seems to be more open towards conversion as a halakhic concept. And the Ashkenazi community or the Ashkenazi views contain some of the more stringent or more narrower approaches to conversion, with regard to Kabbalat HaMitzvot and the like. And we'll encounter this a little bit later also. But in that case, in 1927, it was the Sephardic rabbi who was approached by someone who wanted to convert that was open to the conversion, and it was the Ashkenazi rabbi, Rabbi Goldman, who was opposed. And essentially, that led the Sephardic rabbi to realize that it's very complicated to do conversion in the country. And the Rabbi Goldman's opposition stemmed mainly from the fact that to convert, you have to convert to be an observant Jew, but there just weren't that many observant Jews in Argentina. So how can you convert to be an observant Jew in Argentina if that's not the way the Jews are living? And so basically the takana was established in Argentina because it was just not viewed as realistic to take even well-intentioned converts to make them Jewish there because of the complexity of the religious situation there. And as they say, the rest is history. Now, the rabbi of Buenos Aires who was quoted here, who says that, again, they're not judging, they're just a self-imposed limitation by Argentina's Orthodox rabbis on their own authority. Right? The rabbis are basically declaring with their rabbinic authority, we don't want the rabbinic authority on conversion. We are saying the rabbis of Argentina are decreeing upon themselves not to do conversions. You would do conversions, be my guest, but we're just not going to. We will not do those, so therefore we're not going to recognize those, and it should not be used to decide whether or not someone's Jewish or not Jewish. This has to do with the issue of conversion. So that this brings to mind, maybe bringing to mind for some of you, the opposition in the Syrian community for against conversion, because Rabbi Shiabar, that is anyone who's ever seen a Sephardic or Syrian school or shul or Sephardi center recognizes the last name. And in fact, in February 1935, there was a rabbinical proclamation in the Syrian community that, if you take a look, source 2, we have observed the conditions prevailing in the general Jewish community where some youth have left to have the haven of their faith, have assimilated with non-Jews. In certain cases, they've made efforts to marry Gentiles, sometimes without any effort to convert them, and other times an effort is made for conversion to our faith, an action which is absolutely invalid and worthless in the eyes of the law of our Torah. We have therefore bestirred ourselves to build and establish an iron wall, right? It's an iron dome, iron beam, to protect our identity and religious integrity, to bolster the strong foundations of our faith and the religious purity which we have maintained for many centuries, going back to our country of origin, Syria. Right? So therefore, what are they going to do? And this is a translation of the Takana. We, the undersigned rabbis, constituting the religious court together with the executive committee of Magen David congregation, back in the days when all there was one Syrian synagogue. Anyone ever go to that synagogue, Magen David congregation, the original one? I think it's in Bensonhurst. Right? There are really no Jews living there anymore, but that's where the old synagogue was, and that's where they have funerals and the like. Anyway, the outstanding leader of the community do hereby agree with the authority of our Torah that no male or female member of our community has the right to intermarry with non-Jews. This law covers conversions, which we consider to be fictitious and valueless. We further decree that no further future rabbinic court of the community should have the right or authority to convert male or female Jews to seek to marry in our community. We follow the example of the community in Argentina, which maintains a rabbinic ban on any of the marital arrangements enumerated above, an edict which has received the wholehearted and qualified support of the chief rabbin in Israel. The response is discussed in detail in Devar Shaul. In the event that any member of our community should ignore our ruling, their issue will have to suffer the consequences. Announcements to this effect will be made advertising to the community not to allow any marriage with children of such converts. We are confident the Jewish people are holy people and will adhere to the decision of the rabbis and will not conceive of doing otherwise. Right? So it's signed by 5 rabbis. These were not the only rabbis. One of the more well-known, learned poskim, halachic authorities in the Syrian community did not sign the takana. But essentially, they're saying, look, Argentina was having a problem with conversion, so they opted out of doing conversions. They opted out of the whole conversion concept. We're going to do something similar. And this is what they did in 1935. Fast forward 10 years later, it becomes a little bit more specified and broad. On the 9th day of Adar, in the year 5706, corresponding 10 February 4th, 1946, the rabbis community in the committee of Magen David once again discussed the question of intermarriage and conversions. The following religious rabbinic decisions were promulgated and accepted. 1, our community will never accept any converts, male or female, for marriage. The rabbi will not perform any religious ceremonies for such couples, marriages, circumcisions, bar mitzvahs. In fact, the congregation's premises will be barred from them for use of any religious or social nature. 3, the misadrim of the congregation, I guess like Gabayim, will not accord any honors to the convert or one married to a convert, such as offering himlin and aliyah to the Torah. In addition to the aforesaid person, male or female, will not be allowed to purchase a seat permanently. Right? Selling seats, I guess, was often always a big deal. After death of said person, he or she is not to be buried in a cemetery of our community known as Rothfeld Center. Right? So now they decide to expand and be a little bit more specific. We want to keep any converts out of the community. If you look into it, it was addressed again in the 70s and the 80s, and this remains essentially the guiding principles within the Syrian community today. So, what's going on? What's the concern? Can you reject a convert? I think someone who converts to Judaism is Jewish. you can decide not to recognize them or accept them, which seems to be really what happened in Argentina. And the Syrian rabbis went further and did the same thing. They even quote that they're following those in Argentina. And we're basically saying we want to stay away from converts. We're not going to do the conversions. We're not going to let the converts in, and we're not going to give them synagogue honors. We're not going to officiate. We're basically stepping away from involving ourselves in converts. And not only are we stepping away, we're decreeing that you have to step away. So that's the issue as being presented. Questions, comments, reactions. Before we go into a little bit in terms of understanding when someone is fully Jewish, and what are the reasons to question that Jewishness, as well as stepping out of whether there's halachic value in stepping away from conversion or not, or maybe that's just a values or judgment issue. So I think in general we're familiar enough. Conversion is someone who doesn't want to be Jewish, and they do want to be Jewish, and they go through a process, and it involves accepting mitzvot and accepting Judaism, being part of the Jewish people, going to the mikveh. If it's a male, it has to be circumcision. We're kind of familiar with the concept of a process, but the idea of the process being imperfect is something that already was rabbinically understood. So source number 4 is a Tosefta in Demai. Just a reminder, Tosefta are basically mishnaic, right, Tanaitic, Mishnah level teachings that are not included specifically in the Mishnah. They're often quoted in the Gemara, included in the Talmud. But we have the collection is kind of the way I would always understand is the Mishnah that we have are teachings of the Tanaim edited by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. Not all some of the teachings were left on the cutting room floor. So those are Tosefta. Those are additional teachings that were left out. So this Tosefta is describing, someone's Jewish status, and it's a convert who accepted upon himself all the words of the Torah, but is suspect about one matter. Even if he's suspect about all of the Torah in its entirety, behold, he's like an apostate Jew. Right, if someone converts to Judaism and then is a sinner, well, it doesn't reflect on their conversion; it reflects on their being a good Jew or not. And so that's the first teaching of the Tosefta Demai, chapter 2, number 4. However, a convert who accepted upon himself all the words of the Torah except for one, we do not accept him. Right. So let's say this person, a part of the conversion process is, do you accept Torah and mitzvos? And the convert says yes, except lashon hara. Right. That does not help. That person is not Jewish. Rabbi Yehuda says even a small matter from the details of the scribes, it's not even necessarily refusing a Torah concept. If a person says, I accept it all except, I don't know, which minor rabbinic detail do we want to talk about? It brings to mind the story of the person who's converting to Judaism, and we're all familiar with the idea that when one is converting based on the Talmud, he's not allowed to keep Shabbat completely, so he's supposed to violate Shabbat in one way. So the conversion candidate seems to be observing Shabbat completely and absolutely. The rabbi said, you're supposed to be violating Shabbat. What are you doing to violate Shabbat? And the conversion candidate says, well, I'm wearing tzitzis that don't have tcheles, which means that tzitzis that don't have tcheles aren't complete tzitzis. He's like, so what? Every Jew wears tzitzis without tcheles. He's like, yeah, but if you're wearing tzitzis without tcheles, there is an opinion that you're carrying on Shabbos. So I'm carrying on Shabbos by wearing these tzitzis that are imperfect, incomplete, so they're not clothing, so therefore I'm carrying them. The rabbi says, well, it's not a problem because we have an Eruv. So the conversion candidate says, well, I don't hold from the Eruv, so therefore I'm carrying on Shabbos. Right? So how far? What is the minor prat that the person doesn't want to accept? In any event, if a person says, I convert all of Judaism except, I won't laugh at Rabbi Weinstock's jokes. Okay, something like that. I don't know. Whatever it is, that person is not Jewish. So we have here a few things. One, we have the idea that a convert is a convert, and once they convert, you can't roll back the conversion. But if the conversion is not complete, that could indicate that it's not a conversion. And so when we recognize that the fact that the conversion has to be rigorous, has to be thorough, has to be complete. If it's not complete, then we may have an issue. But once it's complete, you can't roll it back. When the Rambam codifies this, and again, the process, there are all sorts of questions in the Rambam, in the Shulchan Aruch, as to the nature, what happens if the different parts of conversion are performed less than optimally and the like. And so this is a selection of that as enumerated by the Rambam. The proper mitzvah, source 5, is that when a man or woman comes to convert, we check if he does so to receive money or to attain power, if he enters the religion because of fear. And if he is a man, we check perchance if he fancies a Jewish woman. If she is a woman, perchance she fancies a Jewish man. If we do not find any ulterior motive, then we inform him of the weight of the yoke of the Torah and the burden there is for common people in fulfilling it, so they will withdraw. But we got to show them that this is serious, and if you take it upon yourself, you are taking upon yourself a burden of commandments that you don't have to right now. If they accept and do not withdraw, we see they return from love, we accept them, right? She saw that she persisted to walk with her, and she's speaking to her, right? Ruth and Naomi. Naomi doesn't want Ruth to come. Ruth goes through the whole speech. I will go, you will go, I'll be buried, wherever you'll be buried. And then Naomi basically says, okay, and if she stops trying to dissuade her, so we accept it. So the Rambam says that's the optimal situation. Nevertheless, there were many people converted in the presence of ordinary people during the era of David and Solomon. The Supreme Sanhedrin would view them with skepticism. Since they immersed themselves, they would not reject them, but they would not draw them close until they saw that the outcome would be. So mentioning that there were those who seemed to have insincere motivation, less than perfect process, the Rabbi Supreme Sanhedrin stayed away. They conversed in the presence of ordinary people, 3 adult observant males, right, who were kosher as witnesses. So we see that their conversion process was recognized as having been a process, and that was basically, if they were living as Jews, then the Sanhedrin would not reject them, but they would view them with suspicion until we can see whether or not they're living as Jews. So we recognize that there's an ideal situation. There's a less than ideal situation, in which case we may be suspicious of motivations, or the process itself did not involve the rabbis, involved ordinary lay people. The rabbis may step back. Rabbis who don't want to engage in conversion, they're self-censoring, they're limiting themselves. We see a little bit of that sentiment that gets expressed in Argentina and the Syrian community later on. Even if it became known that he's converting for an ulterior motive, since he was circumcised and immersed, he left the Gentile nations, and we suspect him until his righteousness is clarified. Even if he returns and worships idolatry, behold, he's like an apostate Jew, betrothed was valid, and one is obligated to return his lost objects. If he enters into the Jewish people, we may be suspicious, but we can't count him as a non-Jew. Once he immerses, he becomes a Jew. For this reason, Samson and Solomon remained with their wives, even though their inner feelings were revealed. I think of all those, all of those wives of Shlomo HaMelech who were not such upstanding Jewesses. They talk about the same thing. Samson and Delilah, she must have converted, but it didn't stick. So there's a recognition that you can end up in a situation where even if someone may have a less than ideal process, but it's enough to be Jewish, and their Jewishness is not the best, but it's enough to be counted as Jewish. Even if then they go over to the dark side and stop being Jewish, like the wives of Samson and Solomon, they remain Jewish. So we see that on the conversion side, it has to be rigorous. We see that if it's less than ideal, it could still be Jewish. And once it's Jewish, you can't be not Jewish. So, on some level, the Rambam, I believe, gives a bit of a roadmap as to the challenges that the Argentinian Syrian rabbis were faced with. We go down this path, we may start including or introducing an element that's less than ideal, less than optimal, that could be detrimental to the progress of the community. Maybe the best way is to step away from conversion and to put up barriers against conversion. Stepping away from conversion is self-censorship, is self-limitation. What about the walls going up against converts as were delineated in the 1946 version of the Syrian Takana? That's not found here, but they seem to be a response to the fact that once you open the door to converts, should there be negative behavior or backsliding, you won't be able to stop it, and that seems to be the motivation. Now, where there does seem to be, very much a difference of opinion is when you want to kind of wholesale reject or say conversions are not recognized, are not valid, and this was a big case back in 2008, 2010 in Israel, where there was a question raised about a woman who had converted, who seemed to who was converted in a Israeli chief rabbinate sanctioned Beit Din, who then seemed to be less observant, and there was a Beit Din adjudicating whether she was still Jewish, and there was a 2-to-1 verdict that she was Jewish, but the one person who was against it really went after, was against this, and was able to start a process. His name was Rabbi Sherman. You can look up the case, and was able to really open up a whole situation, be able to set up another Beit Din, also within the chief rabbinate, that rejected all of the conversions done by Rabbi Chaim Druckman, who was a major figure in the rabbinate and religious Zionist community, and was really, if you're looking at contemporary Jewish communal relations in history, that was a major turning point in conversion in general, being suspicious of conversions of those who were more religious, less religious. It entered into a kind of a he said, she said, or this one's more religious, this one's less religious. So Rabbi Yosef Tzvi Rimon from Israel, who's very active in the Mizrahi world today, and is a tremendous Talmud Chacham, wrote an article for Tradition about contemporary Ashkenazi psak regarding the invalidation of conversion. He dug down deeply into this case and highlighted the halachic methodologies of both sides. He's very sympathetic to the Rabbi Druckman side, and the halachic Beit Din tactics used by Rabbi Sherman were not the mainstream accepted ones in the broader community. What was then the broader community and maybe now has been narrowed down, but he pointed out that really a lot of this hinges upon conversion requires Kabbalat HaMitzvot. They have to accept the mitzvos. The question is, what does that Kabbalat mitzvot look like? What is it based on? The person says, I accept commandments. How do you know they accept the commandments? Well, you have to look into their heart. We have a concept in the Talmud, Dvarim shebelev einam dvarim. Whatever's in the heart doesn't count. So, how do you dig down deeply? So, generally, I would say in a practical sense, we usually base it on the conversion candidate's process. They've studied, and they're going to shul, and they have a rabbi, and they have a relationship with the community, and it's not just in a vacuum. But how do we know what's happening? And also, how do you know what's happening? Right now they accept the commandments. What about tomorrow? What about a year from now? What if they're not keeping kosher 10 years from now? Does that indicate anything wrong in the process of their conversion at the time? So I think we have mentioned once before that the idea of Kabbalat mitzvot, accepting commandments, is it I accept to keep them, or am I accepting to promise to keep them? Promising to keep them means if you break the promise, maybe the acceptance is also broken and the conversion gets rolled back. That is a less commonly held view, although it is there in the Ashkenazi rabbinic world, that has now been more and more embraced as the conversion issue has become more complicated. Now, I would say the conversion is becoming more complicated is the Ashkenazification of the Argentinian and Syrian Takana. The Sephardic rabbis in general, we'll see Rabbi Uziel in a minute, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, all of them in general, for the most part, have a very welcoming, accepting attitude towards conversion. Has to be official, has to be Kabbalat HaMitzvot. But once it's performed, it's performed. The idea of building up barriers is something when you're concerned as to the process of the conversion, as well as if you don't trust the rabbis who are performing the conversion and the like. So that moves away necessarily from the halachic realm into the communal realm. So Rabbi Rimon, addressing this, quotes a Rabbi Dechavsky. Rabbi Shlomo Dechavsky was a senior judge in the chief rabbinical court of the chief rabbin of Israel, kind of related by marriage to Nama. So that's my connection in all of this. I've met him before. In general in Israel, kind of it's hard to, even those who are more part of, involved in religious Zionist halachic circles don't look like religious Zionists, right? And if you see, chief rabbi of Israel now, Ashkenazi also, wears a long black coat and a black hat, and that's just the way the garb looks. But in this case, he very much was defending Rabbi Druckman, and Rabbi Rimon quotes him in source 6. Rabbi Dechavsky is of the opinion that acceptance of mitzvot is required. However, this requirement is fulfilled by a few seconds of acceptance during immersion. If Beit Din attests to the desire of the convert to accept mitzvot, we can assume this was true at the time of immersion, even if shortly afterwards the convert changes his mind. A Beit Din of layman is valid as long as they're fully observant and cannot be invalidated. A second Beit Din cannot claim to possess better knowledge than the initial Beit Din regarding the convert's thoughts. An official rabbinate Beit Din is presumed to act in accordance with the rabbinate rules, should not be inspected, as in the case of an unaffiliated Beit Din. So this is Rav Rimon quoting what Rav Dichasky feels that Rabbi Sherman was wrong on all levels to question what was going on. First off, in general, once a conversion is done, unless you have reason to suspect those who oversaw the conversion, and even then, that's just the difference between l'chachila b'diavad. Once it's done, it should be done. Now he mentions, and this I thought was very interesting, Rav Dichasky did declare one conversion invalid post facto. When he was convinced that the convert had no intention whatsoever any time of observing mitzvot, the convert held a plane ticket for the Shabbat following her conversion, and in fact left the country on that Shabbat. Rav Dichasky claimed that in this case there was a display of false intent from the outset. I think that's kind of interesting. That it wouldn't be rejected, it wouldn't be rolled back or invalidated had she traveled on Shabbat after the conversion. But if you had a ticket that you're going to travel on the Shabbat after the conversion, you bought that ticket before the conversion, and then after the conversion you get on and travel. That was a little bit too much even for Rav Dichasky to maintain that the Kabbalah HaMitzvot was definitely, if she wasn't crossing her fingers, she was crossing her toes, or who knows what. So there you have the recognition of the fact that even though we may hear about trying to invalidate conversions or putting up higher fences for the conversion process, the halachic conversion process, as we've seen, has an ideal, which but essentially is about accepting commandments. There's a less than ideal, and the less than ideal sometimes involves the rabbi stepping away from the conversion, the way the Sanhedrin did in the times of David and Solomon. At the same time, once a person is Jewish, they're Jewish, and it's very hard to roll that back and the like. So, the bans that we're seeing, the Argentinian one, the Syrian one, right, is not about the halachic process of conversion or the convert. So then, source number 7, Rabbi Zvulun Lieberman, as you can tell by the name Lieberman, he is not a Syrian rabbi, but he was one of the Ashkenazi rabbis who was very active in leading the Syrian community at a time when they didn't have as many.
I think he was my principal. I think he was my principal in Ramaz High School for a couple of years.
Oh yeah,
Syrian.
Could be.
Yeah,
He has
definitely.
a son who unfortunately was murdered in Shem, I think it was. That a lot of people knew.
We called him Zippy.
So he, also for many years the rabbi at Shaarei Zion in Brooklyn was Rabbi Abraham Hecht. Also not a Syrian name. He was a Chabad rabbi who was a Syrian rabbi. Right, a lot has changed in the Syrian Jewish community, since 1935 and 46 and 74, even 1988. So Rabbi Lieberman wrote an article in Tradition about the Syrian takana, source 7, and I think he lays it in terms of what's happening. The ban is based on the right of the community to promulgate takanot and prohibitions. This is codified in the Shulchan Aruch and goes back to Talmudic times when Rav found a problematic situation regarding oaths in the Babylonian community. It's a Gemara in Chulin. Bika matzah v'gadar geder. He found an open valley and built a fence. Right? You don't want to fall into the pit. Sometimes you got to take action yourselves to make sure to protect the situation. Current situation in America regarding conversions, whereby most gerut is done for the purpose of marriage, represents a sham and travesty of the Jewish tradition. Okay, those are very harsh words against it, but he's right about most of the conversion is done for the sake of marriage. But the Sephardic community's approach is proof of the power of a kehillah to protect its heritage and traditions, even though it may not be reproducible across all Jewish communities. Our ban does not necessarily deny the legitimacy of any specific conversion. It does deny the convert and his or her Sephardic spouse and their children membership in the community. Right? We're basically saying conversion exists. We're just stepping away. We're not performing it, and we're not welcoming it into our community. Of course, it does not apply to descendants of people who underwent a legitimate conversion prior to 1935, right? Before the community self-regulated, I was about to say like self-medicated. They self-regulated, or to adopted children converted at birth. So it's also very interesting. If you have a Syrian couple who is adopting a child, if that child is converted, you will not find Syrian rabbis who will do the conversion. But if there is a conversion done for an adopted child, that's okay, because the takana language did not extend to that. And here we come, and we'll see analysis in a minute from Rabbi Ricky Hidary, who is a professor at Yeshiva University, teaches at Stern, a rabbi in the Syrian community, who wrote a large article about it. Someone, when I was preparing this, I kind of checked with some of my Sephardic and Syrian colleagues as to the nature of the takana, and that this is in fact the case. If there's a Syrian couple who adopts and the child is converted, it's not included in the takana. Maybe they weren't even thinking about it. Their biggest issue was conversion for marriage, and so they didn't address it. But there is that loophole, and basically, this was an effort of the Syrian rabbis to themselves step away from conversion. And if you notice the way the takana was mentioned, especially in the 1946 update, and same as in subsequent versions, it started to involve lay people and heads of institutions. So, even though, it's really those institutions that are subject to the takana. You have to opt in. You have to be the one to initiate it and opt into it. If you do not, if you don't opt into it or follow it, you may not be able to be called Syrian, but that may not be an issue. So, for example, we know that there's a lot of this antipathy and this opposition towards conversion and converting in the Syrian community, for example, does not extend to Yeshiva Flatbush, which accepts converts. Because even if we want to make a joke that Yeshiva Flatbush has turned all Syrian, it's not a Syrian institution. It's not part of the community network that has opted into the takana. And therefore, even though many Syrians go there, they do not have this policy of not giving aliyot, for example, to converts at the minyan at Yeshiva Flatbush. Same is not true at Magen David. Again, it's about the nature of the institution opting into the takana to be part of the community network, which has its advantages, but you can remain outside of it. And therefore, as someone who has worked with converts who where one of the partners grew up in the Syrian community, it happens. The wedding is a wedding. It just means that this couple's child will not be able to have a bar mitzvah in a Magen David synagogue, part of the Syrian community. It's more of a communal behavioral standard rather than an absolute halachic concept, and it's something that, as Rabbi Lieberman describes doing, it was there to protect its heritage and traditions, even though it may not be reproducible across all American Jewish communities. Now, this sentiment is not necessarily Sephardic. You see Rabbi Ben Uziel, who was a Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel, and who very much is mainstream amongst Sephardic poskim. I would say the Sephardic poskim have veered more into Ashkenazi, just like in Israel. There's a lot of mingling of the traditions. I think that they've shown that an overwhelming majority of children in Israel don't know if they're Ashkenazi or Sephardi because the families are blended. So Rabbi Uziel, in source number 8, in this case, we have to question the matter from its essence whether this is called offense for a mitzvah. It was asked about the Sephardic takana, or the Syrian takana. So is this really offense? After all, there's an aspect of stringency that we should not lock the door before those entering the gates of repentance and leave them by force in sinful relationships and reject their children. Even though they're not called sons, they are of the seed of Israel from the father's side. We must bring them close to Judaism and not push them away from Torah of Israel from Judaism forever. I wonder greatly whether there is an offense for the masses to prevent them from intermarriage, or quite the opposite. When they lose hope in acting with permission, they will act in transgression and will pull themselves and their children out of the Torah of Israel and the congregation of Israel. Right? It's a double-edged sword. You call it offense, protect it's also a lock gate preventing repentance or heading in the right direction. And so I think that there's definitely, from a halachic perspective, we see how the halachic concept exists. The rabbis saw the need to do something, so they opted out of conversion and welcoming conversions. But can the rabbis ban conversions? No. There is the power of community norms, and those community norms are only as strong as those communities. But from a halachic perspective, that's not the generally accepted approach, even though, as we've mentioned and seen, with the Rabbi Sherman case and the Rav Rimon analysis of it, we kind of have shifted into a more restrictive approach to conversion, even maybe going so far as of nullifying conversions. And there is that halakhic concept, because if someone is proven to not have been serious, that's one thing. But we see the burden of proof generally should be really high. The only exception, Rabbi Duchowski ever encountered was that situation of the conversion candidate buying the ticket before the conversion to travel on Shabbat afterwards and actually doing so. So, this is definitely more of a communal dynamic. And I think Rabbi Hidary has a good analysis of this. This is source number 9 from an article about conversion published by the Orthodox Forum at Yeshiva University. The Syrian ban has been applied more and more stringently over time. The language of the original enactment prohibits only conversion for marriage. In fact, in 1972, Rabbi Kassin himself permitted one man to marry a convert, saying she's a refugee who has taken refuge under the wings of the Shekhinah. Nevertheless, Rabbi Kassin would not attend the wedding in order that the people would not take it as a precedent for undermining the enactment. 28 years later, the daughter of this couple, who incidentally attended Stern College, was almost engaged to a Syrian boy. However, Rabbi Saul Kassin, the son of Rabbi Jacob Kassin, successfully persuaded the boy's parents to break off their relationship, arguing that his father only said the conversion was valid, but not that she would be accepted in the community. Sephardic Rabbinical Council then voted to accept her, but the damage was done. There are many such stories. There are many stories such as this. Today, the ban is interpreted so strictly that even children of those who convert in other communities cannot marry into the Syrian community. Right? If you're thinking back to the language, of the initial, it was really not necessarily applying to outsiders. The Argentinian ban was anyone not converted in Israel. The ban has caused great harm to many, especially the children and grandchildren of converts. Some of these children who were denied the ability to marry within the community ended up intermarrying, right? Thinking it's channeling the Rabbi Uziel. At the same time, it is almost universally accepted within the community that the ban has prevented many young people from developing serious relationships with non-Jews, knowing that there could be no recourse to conversion to be accepted within the community, right? There is that escape hatch. That conversion can save the family, but it's not there in the Syrian community. It is difficult to know how differently the community would look today had there not been a ban. Most members, rabbis, and alike feel strongly that the ban was integral in saving the community from being lost, certainly during the decades before its day schools were established. And the rest continues to be, history in the making. So, that is, regards, it's still alive. And making it an issue in Argentina today. The community is less centralized. You have a Masorti community and the like, but we see this as being more playing out of the conversion political dynamics that continue to exist and have only intensified since the Rabbi Sherman case in Israel and the like. And we see that even in the Syrian community, it seems to have done a good job. Once it's established, it's kind of hard to roll back, but there is, and Rabbi Hidary, mentions it, and I can, speak from firsthand experience, it remains an issue that, can complicate it. But like we said before, the institution, you can be nice, practicing according to the Syrian traditions and just pray somewhere else, or go to Yeshiva Flatbush, or, the like. And, there's certainly rabbis who would, appreciate that as well. So happy to take any questions or comments.
So the many times that the Torah says, to be kind to Gerim, I guess there's one in this week's Parsha to V'gerlos and Evelos Chatzenu Ki Gerim Eizim Be'eretz Shem. So what when the Torah talks about a ger, what is that? That's not a convert?
Yeah. So again, the rabbis understand that as the convert. Is it 36? Is it 56? Is it 100? You have to be. There seems to be a strong recognition that that's talking about the convert. Now, ger toshav is different than a ger tzedek.
Right.
It seems that the rabbinic tradition applies it to both. And those who want to be more welcoming and expansive in the opening the gates, the path to conversion will focus on that. And those who want to be more limiting will focus it. It's not really about being proactively nice to the ger tzedek. It's be nice to the ger tosha. But that's the beauty of elu ve'elu.
Thanks.